Hello, Laura.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. How'd you like that introduction? I always do a new one for us.
I love every time I watch it, I get chills. I'm like, oh my god, that's us.
Yeah, no, that was. I felt like that music would be appropriate for this. Yeah,
I'm
this is.
excited for this episode. Really
I
excited.
know this is definitely in your wheelhouse. Finally,
Yes.
I know you've been excited. I've been excited. Richard's a great person. I love a lot of what he's written. Phenomenal author. But before we get to having Richard on tonight, I think we should tell people about a place that we were at last night that was just out of this world and amazing.
Yeah, it was by far the best paranormal investigation I have ever done. And you have done it before, actually.
Yeah, I actually have, and I actually, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but I believe I drove Richard there to the USS Salem the first
no
time.
way.
Yeah, and Richard was planning to write something about the USS Salem, but he can tell us or not tell us about that. But Richard has even been there. But yeah, I've been to the USS Salem probably over a dozen times. I built a great rapport and friendship with Don DeCristofaro, who runs Greater Boston Paranormal Associates. But I've even been on that ship as long as maybe Don has even been on that ship, to be honest with you. When they used to do JROTC on the ship, they used to have JROTC on the ship, and they used to do sleepovers. A ship that still does that is USS Massachusetts, which is in Battleship Golden Fall River, which is probably a stone throw from Lizzie Borden's bed and breakfast.
We might have to go there next.
Yes, right. But USS Salem is amazing.
Yeah, if anybody has not checked that place out, highly recommend going to USS Salem, especially if you want like a really paranormal encounter. It's amazing.
So, what's it called? Can you, for some of the listeners or viewers, of course, this will be on Spotify and all the Apple podcast and podcast locations after tonight. What were some of the things that happened last night, especially if somebody that has just really gotten into paranormal investigating within the past couple of years? What blew your mind last night? Because I for sure was blown away last. It was the most active night I've ever had on the ship. So
yeah, and Dylan, who runs the ship, was saying that too. That was the most active night. Well, I'll say after you left, because I think I don't know if you got to see the video. Right after you left, we went back into the surgery room, and that was a really active room for us. And we heard that woman's wail, and it was funny because there were 9 people in the room, and all of us heard this woman's wail. And MJ and Shannon, I think, got on the camera. I jumped. You can see me jumping in the camera, going like this. When I heard the wail, I was like that visceral of a reaction. So I went back in the surgery room. And for some reason, I saw a wheelchair and I wanted to set this wheelchair up. So I put the wheelchair and then I put a cat ball in the wheelchair, and it went off a couple times with some intelligent responses. But the craziest part that we got on camera at the very, very end, we heard someone turning on the water. You could hear the water running, and then you could hear like the water being shut off and like a drip, drip, and then somebody turning it back on, and then it turning off. And so we did it 3 times, and then as we're leaving, Dom went to go check the water. He's like, "Yeah, someone shut the water off."
Jeez. That's pretty crazy. I wish I was there. If I didn't take a 2-minute nap before, I would have been a part of that.
So James passed out when we were like in one of the rooms and we're doing the EVPs. And James, well, you got up at 4:30 in the morning, so you had your earphones in listening to the EVPs, and you went to sleep. And what did Don say? Don's like, "I think he might be dead or something," and he's like, "But it would be great for business if he was." And then we started like planning like a vigil for James and like doing ghost tours of James who died on the ship.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and I totally was exhausted. I know Joe Rayon was in the chair, the comfortable chair in the CPMS, and he even said to me, "He was like, I almost went out of it too."
You guys were like, I was surprised because usually you two are the ones that are like going full throttle until the end of the night.
We are, but last night, but I think it was too active for us, even us. What makes you excited for tonight's show? It's kind of a stupid question, but I really wanted to.
Yeah.
What makes you
I'm so used to being interviewed about serial killers, so this is like the first time I get to, probe into somebody else's mind and discuss the cases about these serial killers, and it's. I'm excited to talk to another expert, somebody who's written such an amazing book that he's already gotten the volume 2 going.
Yeah, that's very hard, especially being an author. Like everybody says, "James, why don't you write a book?" Well, it's not my forte. It's not what I want to do, so to say. But there are people that are meant to do it, and Richard Estep is one of those people that are meant to do it. Like he even wrote a book that tells you how to write a book. He just had a book called. I don't want to butcher the name, but I know it's a handbook like on the armed forces, basically kind of like a helpful guide. But Richard has, from what I understand, has written 20 books, but he has 28 in the work frame. So like 28 books is a lot of books for an individual.
It's incredible. It's very impressive, I can tell you, because I just finished my proposal to go out to look at publishers, and I can tell anybody listening, it is quite a feat. It's very rare to even get a book published. To even to have 28 is incredible, beyond incredible, and especially for one book to go into a second volume is very remarkable.
And he writes for publications and journals as well. I think one's the Haunted magazine, but he can talk about himself and introduce himself. So let's bring Richard on right now. Richard.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
So pretty good. For our guests, we kind of did a little bit of a small introduction of who you are. For our guests that don't know who Richard Estep is, who are you? Why are you here?
Why are any of us here?
Why were you born, Richard?
I ask myself that over and over again. So about me, my name is Richard. I live in Longmont, Colorado, although I come from back east, about 5,000 miles back east as the crow flies, from the UK. Came to the US in 1999. And I make my living as a paramedic and a clinical coordinator these days. So I've had a 20-something year career in pre-hospital medicine. But as a paranormal investigator on both sides of the Atlantic, I decided to use that to tell true stories, to write about haunted locations. And the reason I kind of got sidetracked into true crime and serial killers was that I'd written a book about a gentleman called Herb Baumeister. I don't know how many of your viewers are aware of him or your listeners are aware of him, but he was based out of Indiana and murdered an unknown but anywhere between 11 and 19 men in the swimming pool of his house, Fox Hollow Farm.
Okay. You know how I know this case? Joe, this is a place that Joe always talks about. He's dying to do a paranormal investigation there. but he's
And
told me
then-
a lot about it. Yeah.
Well, we even called Richard on the phone while we were talking about it. I was like, I know a man that wrote a book about that.
And unfortunately, Fox Hollow Farm is closed to investigations pretty much forever, for reasons of, shall we say, local politics. But I was fortunate enough to be able to move in and investigate, and it's one thing to read and watch, material about serial killers. It's another one to be in the house, swim in the pool, and all that kind of stuff, where a serial killer actually did what they do. I used his bathroom. I read books in his library. I sat at his desk. It was an incredible thing, and it made a very personal connection with this awful individual. And on the strength of that book, I was asked if I would care to write a book about serial killers, with no paranormal slant to it.
Mm-hmm.
Can we just say a big hi to everyone in the chat? To Ajang, Aaron, hi Aaron, Ryan, and Mr. Keith Bailey. It's good to have you guys here with us.
Definitely, yes. That's why I brought them up. Hey, everybody. Please, if you could do us a favor, we are in our third show. We had two former great shows. Our first show was Jeff Bellinger with Carl Johnson, Lee Gianmarco Carlson. And then our second show was with Arnie Johnson of The Devil Made Me Do It, or The Devil in Connecticut, with current NESPR director Tony Sparrow. So this is our third show. We are building our audience. So if you could please do us the favor by sharing, liking, and
Follow, subscribe.
hit
Yeah.
the little bell button on our YouTube, whatever people say on these streaming things. Please do all that though, because the more audience we get, the more kind of continuation, the more domino effect that can happen for us. And both Laura and I have our respective careers, but if we can continue doing something we love, talking to people like Richard, and hell, even our plan, right, Laura, is to maybe even have interviews of serial killers or talk to detectives on here as well. And that's kind of our mission with this, just to have a little bit of a different avenue than most. And we have a different perspective too. We're bringing both the demonology and the criminology together, and we're tackling it in a paranormal, but in a true crime sense as well, which there's not many like us. And who has the name True Evil? Not many people.
I just want to give a shout out because I said Joe earlier, who wanted to go to Fox Hollow, so that he is from New England Paranormal. So like them too, guys, follow them.
Yep.
Doing some great work out there.
Well, Paranormal New England.
Paranormal New England. Sorry.
Yes. So Richard, well, it's not the only reason we're having you on tonight, but of course, you did write a book called Serial Killers: The Minds, Methods, and Mayhem of History's. What is it called? There you go. There it is. Richard has a copy too.
Yeah.
But it's a compendium of 33 different serial killers, or when I say killers, maybe one individual, two individuals, or multiple, maybe a clan or a group. But it's 33 individuals or groups that you've documented or researched that has done heinous crimes in America, in England, Scotland, and I think maybe in Russia you have one of them in there, but I could be wrong. But you have this compilation of all these people that have done heinous acts, and it really fits into what true evil is. What, of course, Laura does. This is her bread and butter. We've had two paranormal shows, basically, that kind of lingered on the realms of true crime, like talking about Carl in Fall River, and then talking to Arnie Johnson, who was a convicted murderer. And it's hit on those kind of ley lines of this avenue, but this is I think the full brunt of the force into serial killers, what Laura's bread and butter is. And Laura, I was hoping you maybe can take a little bit of those questions tonight because you're so well versed. You're so well versed, and Richard had to do a lot of research for 33 different people.
You do. You have one of not the serial killer I talked to, but one of his accomplices I've spoken with in one of your chapters. But before I even get to that, I'm so curious. Out of all the cases that you've done, all the serial killers that you've done in this book, which one really drew you? Which one really fascinated you the most out of all the cases?
I would say purely from a personal aspect. I also covered spree killings towards the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had a personal connection with the case, that would probably be James Holmes, the Aurora movie theater shooter, because I had trained many of the EMS crews that responded to that shooting, and I was the paramedic, or one of the paramedics that worked while the bomb squad defused his apartment, the booby traps and things that were there. So,
Wow.
having been kind of connected with that somewhat peripherally,
Yeah.
I saw what awful carnage one of these individuals can wreak on many lives, and I wanted to just where do you start unpicking this mess that leads a human being to do this? So, I find serial killers fascinating. I find spree killers fascinating. I find most crime fascinating and equally repellent. So, yeah, but for me, he was I think the one that I definitely lost most sleep over researching.
It's interesting because we don't really hear about like the serial killers or the spree killers and what they do to society, like the aftermath. But from somebody who's an EMT, you get to really see that up close and personal. What violence can do to society.
Yeah, paramedics certainly do see the violent side of humanity. Police officers, I think, of course, more so. But one thing that I tried to accomplish with this book was that I wanted to make sure that victims were named and that we regard them as people, because when a serial killer murders, well, any killer murders somebody, um, more than one life is lost or destroyed because the family effects. Somebody is orphaned, somebody loses a son or a daughter or a brother or a spouse, a loved one. The damage they do goes far beyond um, the deaths themselves. Not to minimize those deaths, you understand, but there is this whole web of destruction and evil that stems from each of those murders.
Right.
We have a question from the chat, I think, that lingers. I want to talk about some of the serial killers of the 33 that you have that I did extensive research on, or I have some tie to by watching documentaries. But Sam Baltrusis, which is a friend of all of ours, and Laura is related to Sam, actually. Sam Baltrusis says, Richard's serial killer book doesn't focus on the paranormal. However, did he have any paranormal experiences associated with serial and spree killers featured in the book?
Hey, Sam, it's good to see you. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, and thanks for being here. I'd written briefly about the Villisca axe murders, which I think it's safe to say were the work of a serial killer, depending on which theory you believe. And I had experiences with Herb Baumeister, of course, at Fox Hollow Farm, in his former house. I swam in his pool, the pool in which he committed most of the murders, as did a number of my fellow investigators. We recorded growls and strange things of that nature. So in those two particular cases, there was definitely a paranormal element to it. I also had written a book called Gacy's Ghost, which involved a possible haunting of John Wayne Gacy. And you would think that would be Gacy's residence, where he kept all of those bodies in the crawl space under his house. But it turns out that Gacy is supposed to haunt a movie theater in Auburn, Illinois, a town close to where he once ran a KFC franchise, because there is an armoire that the owner of the movie theater brought home, and Gacy was allegedly attached to the armoire. So that was definitely a strange adventure to have. But those three did not, of course, go into the book. The book is straight true crime with no paranormal aspects. So thanks for the question, Sam.
Very good question. Laura, I have a question for you while we focus on getting into serial killers, maybe one that's even in the book. Hi, I have a question for Laura. Who is the person you felt the most uncomfortable with being alone in the room with?
That's a good question. Honestly, the answer is none. I've never felt uncomfortable with any of them. I don't know, because you got to remember, I build the trust and rapport with them for years before I even sit down with them, face to face. So by then we're so comfortable and I feel totally safe. I wouldn't be going into the prisons if I didn't. And had that trust and that friendship and that rapport with them beforehand. So none of them have made me feel unsafe or uncomfortable in any aspect. But there are stories. I know Robert Ressler sat down with Kemper, and the button wasn't working, and he thought, and Kemper had said something about taking off his head. So it does happen with people going to prisons, and the experts too.
So Richard, following with Laura's question, doing researching this book and writing this book, were you ever in the same room or confines of a serial killer? Did you ever interview any of them to kind of get that perspective of why somebody would do something like this?
No, I've the greatest sort of respect for the professionals that are able to sit across the table from one of these individuals and maintain their composure. The only comparable experience I've had, and I can't go into detail, but having sat and rendered medical care to somebody who was guilty of this kind of crime in my career, one of the greatest achievements you can have is to maintain your calm and composure, knowing what it is that is sitting within arm's reach of you. So my greatest respect to the men and women that can do that, and they're doing it, of course, with the goal not of writing a book, but although sometimes they do, but their goal is to better understand, and help us detect future monsters like this, and ultimately save lives. So,
yeah. And Laura, you have something in the work. I don't know if it can. I think officially can be announced now, right? You have something which is coming out, which is about to do this as well, is it not? What is your?
I have 3 things coming out, but you can announce any of them at this point. Which one? The study.
Yeah, the study. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, so next it's less than a week from today. So I'm going to be debuting my serial killer study, which has been 8 years in the making. It's a questionnaire of 80 questions. I had serial killers across the nation answer, and we're going to be showcasing it for the first time, debuting it myself and Dr. White at a homicide conference in Green Bay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And that's to help law enforcement and academia to
Yes.
kind of dissect
Yes. It's a very deep probe into the serial killer's personalities, and we're hoping it can be used for like detection and actually further forensic examinations when they're first, intaked into jail and prison.
Perfect. So while we're talking about that, let's talk about some of the individuals or groups that you wrote about, Richard. And I'm just going to go through a laundry list of them, and then after that laundry list of them, you can pick out which ones stood out to you the most, Laura as well. So we have these only some of them. We have the Moore's murderers, Brad and Hindley, that had 5 child victims. We have Ted Bundy, of course, very famous, had 30 victims confirmed. We had Gacy, the killer clown, which you were talking about, 33 victims confirmed. The Zodiac, which also, of course, had a movie based upon, and is an unknown, unsolved case to this day, had 5 confirmed victims, but of course, supposedly many more. We have Kemper, who we just talked about, which is, if you've watched Netflix recently with Mindhunter, which was a big part of that, and that case that you just talked about, Laura, had first killed his grandparents and then mother, so he has 10 confirmed victims. We have Raider, who is the BTK killer, 10 kills confirmed. We have the Sawney Bean Cannibal Clan, which is a legend but is debated, where they said they had over 1,000 victims. Also inspired The Hills That Have Eyes. Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, 13 confirmed victims, and was solved 50 years later through DNA because of a water bottle. Jeff Dahmer, which Laura can talk about in a second, the Milwaukee Cannibal, 17 confirmed victims. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, 14 confirmed victims. The Acid Bath Murderer, John George Hay, 6 confirmed victims, said to have killed 9 plus, which surprisingly enough, he was caught from stock fraud. Jack the Ripper, another unknown unsolved case, 5 confirmed victims, known as the Chemical Five. And H.H. Holmes, 9 confirmed victims, the man of the murder castle, which H.H. Holmes has a little bit of kind of importance with our next guest, which we'll talk about at the end of the show. But those are some of the serial killers and groups that stood out to me. Of course, reading your book, some of them I didn't know. Some of them are from your native land of England, or actually, like the clan, the Bean clan is from Scotland. But out of all those people, like I know you talked about the Aurora shootings, but like were any of those like to the degree of like you've heard about them before, but then digging deeper into these individuals like Dahmer, or the Zodiac, or Gacy, or Ted Bundy, or Richard Ramirez, that you got a little bit more of understanding why maybe they did it, or what their standpoint was.
Yeah, it was fascinating to delve into almost all of them, and come at it from different angles. The only reason I even put the Sawney Bean clan in there, honestly, was that I wanted to do something that was both historical, and yes, absolutely debatable whether this is just a myth or not. Historians will tell you that the case was grossly overblown and exaggerated, if it happened at all. But it gives us one of the first historical claims of a killer family. So I just had wanted to put something in that. Burke and Hare, the body snatchers, also I wrote about, which absolutely fascinated me because they are one of the only cases, I think, in which, in the grand scheme of things, they were body snatching for a good cause.
Yeah.
They were trying to make money, don't get me wrong. They were vile individuals, but they were stealing bodies and known as the Resurrection Men because there was a chronic shortage of cadavers for trainee doctors to learn their profession on. So learning that they in fact developed their own technique of applying pressure to the chest and asphyxiating someone that is called Burking to this day. And they did that in order to leave as few marks on the body as possible, because they would get paid more the more pristine the corpse was. So they were quite the entrepreneurs.
Serial killer entrepreneurs.
But then, you know,
it's kind of like that too.
Who was that, sorry?
H.H. Holmes was kind of like a serial killer entrepreneur in a way.
He was, and I've got to say, I start this with a blanket statement. I will always defer to Jeff Mudgett on H.H. Holmes. Jeff is the expert. And so my take on H.H. Holmes, like leaving that aside, my take on Holmes was that I don't think he killed people because he enjoyed it. I think Holmes killed people to remove obstacles. He was psychopathic in terms of, if you get in my way, if you get between me and what I want, I'll remove you with no more thought than I would take a chess piece from the board. You know, I don't think he was someone who gloried, like Gacy gloried in the torture and the pain and the humiliation. I don't think Holmes did. I think he wanted what he wanted, and woe betide you if you got in the way of that. What do you think, Laura?
You know, I do think he was killing because he liked it. You know, I mean, to sit at the hotel, and then he had, I mean, just he had there's elements of sadism with putting the, you know, the holes in the room and watching the suffering of, you know, the people dying, the gas rooms and that kind of stuff. You know, the sadists, they love to watch that. They love to watch the torture. They love to agony, the suffering, and the death of the victim. So I definitely see elements of sadism with Holmes, and that almost sick pleasure they get from killing too.
The problem is that so much of Holmes's story comes from magazine and newspaper accounts at the time, and they grossly inflated him to become this boogeyman. And it's really difficult to separate the fact from the fiction, what made it a story from the man himself.
Well, even Laura kind of, our first show, I brought it up because, you know, this is the perception, and she quickly shot it down. Everybody thinks of H.H. Holmes as the first serial killer. You can look that up, and it's like it's plastered everywhere. But in reality, it's not. Like, you had the Bean Clan, which killed, you know, if it was real, killed over 1,000 victims. You have Peter Berg, the werewolf from Bedburg, Germany, who mutilated people way before even H.H. Holmes was even thought to be existed.
And I think also the one that everybody seems to ignore is the Old West, which was essentially a psychopath's dream hunting ground.
Oh, yeah.
You did it with a knife and a 6-shooter at your hip, but there were individuals in the Old West that killed many, many people and got away with it.
Yeah.
We call them outlaws.
Sam has another good question. and Richard discusses red flags associated with serial killers. One that has always confused me has been Ted Bundy. There was something that was described about him was that his eyes turned black and almost like a shift in demeanor. What are your thoughts about Bundy possibly having an attachment? We'll have Richard answer that, and then Laura, I think you can take the cake on that because I have my opinions about Bundy, but I'm not the professional here.
So Sam's asking, there was something about Bundy that implied he may have had an attachment.
Correct. Yes.
A lot of that depends on your own belief system, and I am not sure. I tend to steer away from the paranormal side of things when it comes to crimes like this, because I almost think it's an easy out for Bundy himself to give him this excuse. And Sam, I'm not saying it isn't the case. I'm just saying it's my perspective. To give him this kind of free pass of, or he had an attachment that made him do the things he did. I think that he was a deeply, deeply disturbed human being. Now, as I study serial killers, there are certain commonalities which Laura could talk about all night, and maybe we'll get into that later on. Bundy had a lot of those kind of red flags, as Sam points out, in his past and his makeup.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we need that explanation to explain what he did. And I haven't heard the black eyes thing myself, so I'm not sure. But
Laura, what about you?
I am a believer in the paranormal, and obviously we just did a paranormal investigation last night. And then I also work with the serial killers. So, to this day, I have never met a serial killer that has ever had or killer that has had any demonic possession or, supernatural element that could explain it away. I've just never come across it personally. The blackness in the eyes is something it's talked about with psychopaths. It's almost like when they go into hunt mode, people have described a blackness in the eyes.
Yeah.
It's pretty common, actually. I've seen them go into hunt mode. Their eye, anytime you're changing from a deep emotion, your eyes do change. But the blackness has been noted with the psychopaths. With me, they say to me straight out, I want to kill. That's why I killed. But then I've also seen them turn around and feed some bullshit that, I'm crazy, or, it's a demon, and then turn around and laugh. So, for me, they kind of take that mask off. So I've seen it. So I'm not disbelieving in it. I've just never personally seen anything phenomenal like supernatural.
And the dilation of the pupils that you're talking about, and you're
fixation, right?
It's pupillary dilation secondary to an adrenaline dump.
Yeah.
I mean, it also would happen to anybody in a deeply stressful situation when your fight or flight mode kicks in. So, I don't know that it truly is the turning black as we would see on a horror movie or a TV show.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more about that.
And Sam must be a psychic medium, because I had a few people listed out that I know of within my study as a demonologist, because what I thought with True Evil originally when I approached Laura to it is, of course, Evil, which was on CBS, which was, they had psychologist, demonologist, and a tech guy.
Yeah. But
also I do know of some cases that, of course, touched upon that kind of outside influence. One, we had Arn Johnson on last time, which, he claimed that the devil made him do it. But there's a few other people that I want to pinpoint out that wasn't in your book, which I was surprised about. But one of the son of Sam, he said a demon, which was the Black Labrador, it was named Sam, caused him to commit the murders. And he had 7 confirmed victims. Jason Dalton, who even though it wasn't a demon, he said an Uber app took over his mind to commit murder. Pazuzu Algrad, from a North Carolina man, performed animal sacrifices originally in, of course, magic's sense, and then switched to human beings. There was Michael Taylor in Oyster, England, had an exorcism performed on him, then killed his wife and his dog. Jason Nelson claimed a demon made him commit rape and murder. Arn Johnson, of course, Alan Bono. Which is a prolific one, Albert Fish, claimed doing God's work, claimed to have killed over more than 100 people. So these are some of the people that have claimed an outside influence and have committed murder, and multiple murders at that could be considered serial killers, like Son of Sam. But That Son of Sam's most
I will
prolific.
note that Son of Sam did recant, like came clean and said,
Yeah.
that the whole dog thing was bogus.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course, but what I think of, I'm glad you pinpointed that out. But when you look at it, these are only some. There's not a long list of people that have claimed demonic possession.
Well, and it's kind of interesting because, and I'd love to address Christopher's comment in the chat in just a minute, but I think that the devil made me do it. It goes all the way back to Salem, which Sam Baltrus is an expert on.
Mhm.
And, in Salem, we have all these same hallmarks, right? We have the same accusations flying around, and they ultimately did lead to the execution of innocent people.
Yeah.
So it is a rationale that's as old as time itself.
Yeah.
As to whether it's genuine or not, you have to apply your own belief system to it
Sure.
and see what you think. Ramirez, as Christopher points out, was a Satan worshiper. When he was staying at the Hotel Cecil in Los Angeles, where he was doing much of his killings, it's said that he was performing occult rituals on the roof. There are many claims about that. He truly did believe that Satan would protect him. And that's why Ramirez had this almost brazen sense of invincibility, which, it has to be pointed out, worked for him right up until the moment when it didn't. And he had to be saved from being beaten to death by a mob, by the LAPD. So yes, definitely there is an occult element to some of these killings. As to how much is genuine versus how much is the product of a diseased mind wanting to make their own story more interesting. Ramirez certainly, I think Laura would agree with me on this, was the first, and I hate this term, but it's so apt. He was the first rock star serial killer. He was like the Beatles here in the States in that he had groupies that turned up at the courtroom. And this was a extremely violent rapist and murderer, and had women that were fawning all over him, So the leather jacket, the bad boy look, at least until he smiled and you saw his teeth. Ramirez kind of made the serial killer a celebrity. I mean, can you think of another example that predates him, Laura?
Just Bundy, but you're right. Like, I hate the term rock star like you do, but yeah, Bundy and him were like, they had these groupies showing up, and it was almost like a rock star status for both of them in the courtroom.
And of course, the difference was Bundy had the charm going on a little bit more. Ramirez was just clearly a monster.
Yeah.
But Ramirez played up the occult angle, in the courtroom. He had symbols drawn on his hands, things of that nature.
I think they were both showmen. I mean,
yes,
they were both showmen. I think that played a big factor in their trials and why they kind of blew up in the way they did too.
Yeah, like another one that, of course, we touched upon earlier a little bit, that was, of course, a Satanistic route as well, even though not to the levels of Richard Ramirez and his fame, was, of course, Carl Drew in Fall River. But I do want to ask you this question, Laura. I'm gonna say the question so when it switches the podcast, it can translate well. But then I do have a statistic that I would like to pinpoint out, and it's off of the Anthony Padilla show you just did recently, which great job on that. At almost 500,000 views in a day. Perfection. Claudia Botello says, "Hi, Laura. Do you feel genetics can play a role in serial killers? Thank you." Well, from that statistic that I learned and kind of also already kind of knew from talking to you, Laura, and doing my own research, there was a gentleman on that show that said 40 to 50% of serial killers are psychopaths, and that's it. So, what can you answer that question for us, Laura?
Oh yeah, it's actually a misconception that they're all psychopaths. That's probably one of the. If you actually go on the FBI's website, they actually have like a fact fiction site, and it's actually really interesting. I recommend everybody go on there. One of the biggest myths is that they're all psychopaths. They're not. Another one of the big myths is that they don't stop killing. They do. They either grow out of it, they grow out of age. Typically with somebody with antisocial personality traits like psychopath, sociopath, usually about mid 40s to 50s, the traits start to naturally decrease. So for genetics, do they play a factor? Yes, because if someone is born with, some of the genetics that are predisposition to antisocial personality and psychopaths, yes, that is genetics. But then, I always say a perfect storm. You have the nurture and the nature coming together. and add trauma and childhood, and add everything on. It's a perfect storm.
And you're going to add epigenetics to that as well. With what our recent understandings of that, which is fascinating.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Laura said, that great point. I think what a lot of people really mean is there a DNA marker that we could identify as potential serial killer at birth? Now, there is a genetic component to impulsive violent behavior, to aggression, most definitely. It does not mean, though, that everybody with that particular genetic makeup is going to be a serial killer. It just means that one of the many factors is there. That's the way I see it. You look at people like Gacy, for example, and I often wonder if life just takes a slightly different turn for some people, how many serial killers are never actually born at all? How many of them never actually kill? Gacy's first murder was a young man he picked up at a bus station, at least that we know of. Gacy, he's the only victim of Gacy's that he stabbed to death. All of the others were asphyxiated, strangulation, that kind of thing. Gacy's story, and I'm somewhat inclined to believe him in one of those few instances, was that they had had sex and he woke up to find the kid sleepwalking, holding a knife that Gacy had used to make sandwiches the night before, tried to get it out of his hand. There was a struggle. He fell. Kid was stabbed and died. The only reason I find that remotely credible is, again, Gacy's MO completely changed afterwards. He never stabbed anyone again. But in the days after the murder, Gacy buried the young man under his house. And you can only imagine that he's terrified. The cops are going to knock at my door any day. This kid is missing. Someone's going to say they saw him with me. They'll have my license plate. And then when that didn't happen, when the days became weeks, the weeks became months, and he realized, holy crap, I got away with murder. And you know what? I kind of like this. This is kind of cool. And then he set out doing it. Mm-hmm. If he had never picked that kid up, if there had never been an accidental, possibly accidental killing, we may never have heard of John Wayne Gacy at all. So I think all of the stars have to align for a true serial killer to emerge.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I want to say something about Albert Fish from one of our viewers, Christopher Andrew Perrin. He says I'm assuming it's him. Albert Fish has had all those pins in him. He was one of the worst, along with those Candyland serial killers who would insert glass rods into the urethra of their victims and then shatter them. Oof, that's vicious. That doesn't sound fun at all. Yes. So let me see. I have a little bit distaste of this because I am a Gemini. I don't like astrology. I'm not a big follower of the modern astrology.
Typical Gemini.
Amber Powell says, wondering why serial killers are most likely to be Geminis. Laura, is that true? Are they mostly Geminis?
There's like these memes out that says like most of them are Sagittarius and Geminis. It's actually, they're just memes. It's not true. But there has been a study done on serial killers and zodiacs, but it was far ranging. I do have a couple Geminis, but I mean, I have a couple of every single zodiac. So
yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna make a Gemini joke, but never mind.
Yeah, please don't. No, see, the thing with modern astrology is such a smorgasbord of mixture of people like Galileo and all them people would be like sad in life right now if they observed people what they would follow. But what is it called? So Christopher once also says, haven't there been MRIs of serial killers that have deficiency or no electrical impulses near the brain's hippocampus? As a forensic psychologist, Laura, would that be correct?
I'm not licensed. I'm not a forensic, just a criminologist. But there's a guy out of Arizona. His name is escaping me. He's doing brain scans on serial killers right now. But they have found there is a big thing with the hippocampus. They've seen, I believe it's my phone. I want to say it is shrunken hippocampus, or it might be enlarged. But there is they have found a deformity with the hippocampus with some of them. I want to specify.
Richard, have you heard anything like that being in the medical field yourself?
So I've heard my experience with MRIs and serial killers tends to be with the predominance of closed head trauma, serious head injuries, and a tendency towards this kind of violent behavior in later life. It's kind of shocking how many serial killers sustain a really significant smack to the head, especially during their formative years. I mean, one of them, who was an adult at the time, I believe is in this book, the giggling granny, Nanny Doss, who managed to murder her way through husbands and family members, was in a train when the train stopped sharply and smashed her head into the wall of the train. So head trauma and resultant effects on the brain. But then you have to ask yourself, of the hundreds of thousands of people that sustain head trauma each year, why don't they all become serial killers? What are the other pieces of this jigsaw?
Yeah, head trauma is a big one. I have two that sustained head traumas from a motorcycle accident, and they were totally fine. One was even a Marine before this. The forensic psychologist that I'm working with now with the study, that's one thing he really, really wants to dig into is the head traumas.
Yeah.
With some of them. But there is, I wish I knew his name. There is a guy doing brain scans out of Arizona now, starting to look into it because there is something with the frontal lobe damage and the head traumas, especially.
Cool. It's good to see our friend Eric Julian in the chat. Hey, Eric.
Yeah, he has a question for you that I was going to bring up for you, Richard. So Eric Julian, which I just saw at the Hoover with Wes Coleman.
Great dude, Eric is.
He is. Yes, he is. He's. If you guys didn't see the picture on Facebook, he's my Brokeback Paranormal partner.
Oh yeah, I saw it. I'm never sleeping again. It was more disturbing than anything I read for this book.
So Eric Julian says, would you consider Hitler a serial killer, even though he wasn't doing the killing?
No, unfortunately. Well, actually, not unfortunately. This is genocide, and there is a real difference between genocide and serial murder. I believe it was Stalin, don't quote me, who said, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths are a statistic, and it's unfortunate. But when you are the head of a nation state, somebody like Hitler or Putin or whoever, no, they don't qualify.
Well, Christopher is saying we are awesome. This has been a recent fascination turning into almost an obsession. I must keep following you guys. Well, worried about that obsession. Get some help. No, just kidding. Thank you for following us and appreciate it. Erin, who I definitely love, I just met recently in Rochester. We connected.
And her husband is named after, it's the same name as a serial killer, Mike Taylor.
Oh,
That's scary. And she's a licensed counselor. She's a licensed counselor. She got to watch out.
Yeah.
Erin asks, are there still studies with the XYY genetics? It's been a while since I've studied behavioral genetics. One of you guys, I don't.
Honestly, that's a little beyond my wheelhouse. I do not know.
Laura?
that's even beyond my wheelhouse, honestly. I don't know. I know like the subpar level of towards genetics. I've just started to do training with the forensic genetics.
So,
Sorry, Aaron.
That's a question for some of the theorists out there.
Yeah.
Behaviorist theorists. I believe what is like B.F. Skinner and all them. Go read their stuff.
It's a great question.
It is.
And I hope folks are digging the show because I do not want this to be the lesser of true evils.
I think people are. I think people are enjoying the show. She says, "Love you too." Well, thank you. But so I have a few people that you didn't talk about in the book. That I want to
I'm going to bring up the guy that I know his crime partner. It is so Wayne Henley is the one I talked to. So you know the whole case. Well, actually, James, I should probably fill you in on this case. So this case, or actually, no, I'll have Richard fill you in on this case. He probably knows.
Yeah, Richard, tell us about this case, and then Laura can follow up with it.
Okay. Which chapter number is this in the book?
Which one is it? Give me 1 second.
I love how you remember by the chapter book.
It's 313.
313.
Yes.
Let's see where we're at. Okay. Oh, Dean Cole.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of those that I'm amazed there isn't more awareness here.
Of him, right?
Yeah.
A friend of mine, Tracy Ullman, who works for NBC, she just did the Candyman. Mm-hmm. It's streaming on Peacock, where mine is streaming. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But there really isn't that much on this case out there yet.
No, and it's kind of interesting because Cole was one of the more. I mean, this sounds like such a loaded statement, but he was, I think, one of the most brutal and sadistic of the killers. I think he gets overshadowed by Gacy a lot because they had very similar MOs.
He does.
You know, and I also think, unfortunately, that during the time of the Candyman murders, he targeted primarily males. He was a gay man targeted primarily males, not entirely, but primarily. And I think that was a very unpalatable subject back then. You know, there was a lot of bias in the investigation of these crimes. When I was talking to the witnesses in the Fox Hollow case, the Herb Baumeister case, you know, gay men were disappearing from nightclubs in Indianapolis, like they were just disappearing in incredible numbers. And police officers had said things like, they just moved on to San Francisco, or even they got AIDS and died, probably, you know, in the early days. So I think with Dean Paul, we saw a lot of that too, that he didn't get the attention because of the nature of his victims. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I would say that's for a lot of serial killers too. You know,
Yes.
It's very sad. You know, that's how they were able to fly under the radar so much.
They prey on the poor people that are on the fringes of society, the ones that won't be looked for, won't be missed.
Yeah.
And it's horrifying how many of the victims remain unidentified, or even it isn't known that they're even missing.
That's the saddest part, is the ones that you don't even know are missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of these serial killers, you know, I talked about confirmed kill. I almost say confirmed kills, like confirmed victims. Many of them probably had killed many more people that were never found, or still are missing posters to this day. And even some of them said, I've killed 90, 80, 70, 60 people, but they've only, of course, get confirmed for so many because that's what were found or what was associated to them. And like Jack the Ripper is a prime example, you know, even though Chemical 5, but there's so many other people that supposedly are associated to Jack the Ripper. So that's a prime example. Like it's crazy to think some people are categorized or even found, like you said. To me, that's sad. There's probably droves of people out there that their families still wallow about their whereabouts, and it's crazy to me.
Absolutely. Some of their loved ones are in a box somewhere in a forensic anthropologist's office, unidentified.
Yeah.
And that's just heartbreaking.
It is. It really is.
Really heartbreaking.
Like you know, we had Sam asking questions earlier. One of the individuals that you know, Sam and I did an investigation and filmed a documentary for that never came out. What was called Haunted Cape Cod, and you know, we think that has ties to Carl Drew, but it's the Lady of the Dunes case that happened. You know, she was never identified of who she was, and to me that's sad. Like, you know, she had a family out there, and they never knew where that person went. But you know, she's identified because her body was so decomposed at that point, and you know, genetics, DNA testing wasn't even really at that point of the pinnacle to really determine who she was. But yeah, that's something that I have a connection to, which I find sad.
And I just want to specify for anybody out there who doesn't, it's a very big New England case, but most people don't know who the Lady in the Dunes is.
Yeah.
There was a woman found in the dunes of Cape Cod. I do have a serial killer that I'm looking at hard for that case, because he was known to kill people on Cape Cod and put them in the dunes. So, and he's been
really?
he's been looked at for her murder too. And but what's interesting about her case is, I think I don't know if this is a true fact, but I read that I think it was Stephen King had seen the Lady in the Dunes, this unidentified woman, and she was an extra on Jaws. Or is that a myth, or they had accurately?
I think that's a myth. Yeah, but yeah.
Okay. But she had looked like this extra from Jaws, but it's been since, what was it, the 70s? She's been unidentified on Cape Cod, but she's a pretty big, you know, unidentified person out in Mass.
We have a huge question. Christopher Andrew Perrin, once again. Thank you for all these great questions. Any thoughts on the LISK? Has there been a stoppage, and has the main suspect, which I thought was a cop, stopped because he was under suspicion? In the unsolved murder in LA, where some of the victims were related, but I think the cop was the main suspect in that, but somehow things were buried. Laura, you're in LA. Well, you were in LA. until a few days ago. Have you heard of that LISK case?
Obsessed with the list case. I'm dying to go to Long Island to actually go to the spots on the list. I could do a whole show on just list. Richard, have you been following the Long Island serial killer?
I actually haven't. There are so many of them, and I love that folks are saying, is this killer or is that killer in the book? I did just finish the second volume of this, and as soon as I finish one of these books, I need to go do something else. Like I need to stop following this stuff and then coming back. So a number of serial killers die between me submitting the manuscript and the book getting published 18 months later. So it's kind of interesting. But no, I haven't been following this particular case. But I will say that kind of alluding to what you say and to what Aaron says in the chat, a question about how many serial killers have been cops or law enforcement. Quite a few have been either police officers themselves or police aficionados, police groupies that would hang out with cops, that would have scanners. And I was a firefighter for 15 years. And one of the things that the arson investigators always used to say was that if you have a structure fire that's suspicious, they're always looking at the people in the crowd. Because while the fire department's putting the fire out, they're looking for someone who's watching their handiwork and getting a thrill from it. And they also want to know, are they, how close am I to being discovered? And so a number of serial killers get close to the police. They're that really nice guy that brings donuts in and buys the cops a round of drinks in the bar or whatever, all because they want to get close to law enforcement.
It's actually a control thing for them, getting close to the investigation, thinking they have control over the investigation, just like they have control over the victim too. I don't even know if you know this, James. I actually went to the jury room, which is where Ed Kemper used to go hang out, where the local bar, it was the local bar where all the cops hung out. And he would go there and actually sit with the cops. And that's how he became friends with, all the police there.
I never heard that story. It's pretty interesting. I'm sorry for thinking the list case was anything to do with LA. She had two questions.
No, there was something about LA in the second part, I think. Wasn't there?
There was something about an unsolved murder in LA where some of the victims were related, but I think a cop was the main
I think she means Louisiana. There's a case in Louisiana.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's similar, but yeah.
Well, he does bring up a good point about why and when serial killers stop. And this is one of the great questions about Jack the Ripper, isn't it? It's I know Jeff Budget has his theory that H.H. Holmes was Jack the Ripper, and I'll leave that one for Jeff to discuss. But serial killers generally stop because they are either caught for something else and they end up doing time and they're taken off the street. They're unwell, they're ill, they have a breakdown, a heart, some kind of medical condition. They are taken off the streets. It's very, very few. The Grim Sleeper is one that comes to mind, but there are very, very few that are able to stop and start at will. Once that compulsion gets going, they tend to keep going. And so when a serial killer stops, it just sometimes means that the heat has gotten so much that they relocate the country to a different area.
Yeah. It's a good one, Rich. You're jumping questions on me over there, jumping to your own questions, which is fine. So we have one from Amber Powell again. What's the dark triad that makes up most serial killers?
I don't know.
Oh, God, you're putting me to work today. It's I know it's like narcissism. I know what she's talking about. Let me look it up. It's the three of them. It's known as the dark triad. It's it doesn't necessarily have to be a serial killer to be part of the dark triad. This is good because I'm studying for my PI test. Not that this will be on it, but
you never know.
You never know.
Well,
narcissist, psychopath. Okay, yeah. So here it is. So narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy are the three.
Okay.
Also, the characteristics of many CEOs.
Yes, it's very true.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. Politicians and lawyers too.
Or at least the successful ones.
Yeah.
So Richard, bring back to your book on serial killers. Julian asked, does the book cover Kevin Cooper, who is from my hometown of Pittsburgh?
Hi, Eric. It does not. So one of the most difficult things in writing two, probably more, but two books on serial killers has not been who to put in, but who to leave out. There are so many that make for fascinating case studies. And the first book I kind of had to put in People are not going to want to buy a book on serial killers without something about Bundy and Gacy and Dahmer. You just have to check those boxes. It's almost an expectation. Problem is, of course, it's been done so many times, you have to find something new to say. And then I decided to go a little more obscure, a little bit further afield. The majority of my audience for this book is US based. So many people here in the States have not heard of people like the Wars murderers, or Dennis Nielsen. People of that nature. I think Dennis is getting a little better known now since David Tennant played him in that drama show and did a chillingly good job. But I tried to kind of cast a diverse net. So maybe he will make the 3rd volume.
Yeah, and there's a few actually I wanted to bring about that weren't in your book and that maybe could be in your volume 3 that are international. What one I was actually surprised about that wasn't in your book was Samuel Little, who was suspected
he's in the book.
93 plus people.
Yeah, Sam Little's in the book.
Sam Little's in the book. Yeah.
Oh, okay. See, maybe I missed that. So Sam Little's in the book. There you go. So I was wrong.
James, get on your game.
Oh, so sorry, but I brought him up. But also Yang Zhenyai from China. He was a Chinese serial killer with 67 confirmed killings, and it was active until 2003. So more recent. And then Mikhail Popkov.
Volume 2. Yeah, Popkov's in Volume 2, and he is one of those cops that we have just talked about.
He was known as the werewolf, like Peter Stump of Bedburg, Germany. Popkov, and not the Brew in Volume 2, was a prolific killer that had 78 confirmed killings, 78 confirmed victims. It's a lot of people. And then another one, I don't think it was in there, but I could be wrong, was the Golden State Killer.
Correct.
Yes, I'm fascinating one.
13 confirmed victims, but is still unknown to this day, just like Jack the Ripper and, of course, who am I thinking of? Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac. Yeah, in that area, Golden State Killers, which was also prolific as well. But yeah, maybe those will be in Volume 2 besides Samuel Little, which is already in Volume 1.
Yeah, so Volume 2, the theme that I went with for Volume 2, it's actually called The Serial Killer Next Door. And the idea of it was that I wanted to look at those serial killers who were, shall we say, less obvious. So, for example, you look at Jeffrey Dahmer, and he's exactly the kind of stereotypical serial killer, right? He's not exactly the most together individual. But there are those like I believe Colonel Russell Williams is in the 2nd volume, and Russell Williams was an Air Force officer in Canada, flew the Queen of England. Had killed 2 victims and was on his way to killing more. But what was so fascinating about him was this man held high military rank. So the 2nd volume focuses on those that were able to very successfully parallel what we would call a normal professional life with this awful private life of murder and torture.
Yeah, and then Aaron brings up, do we talk about Robert Charles Brown still housed at Colorado Territorial Federal Murderers, frequently maybe a local dance hall?
Nope, no room for him. Like I said, the problem was exactly who to put in and who to leave out. So maybe for Volume 3.
So Richard, I do have a question. Do you think you'll ever tackle cults in your...
Oh, that's a really great question. Yeah, I hope my publisher's listening, actually. You know what I might, Laura? Yeah, you know what I have a hankering to do for Volume 3, and I haven't really talked about this to anyone but the publisher. But I would like to do something about those who murder within the family or murder within their own circle, because we all have this emphasis, don't we, on serial killers being the creepy guy, because it's usually a guy who's out there stalking you. But the truth is, like most murders are committed by people that are known to the loved one. So I kind of wanted to write a book on that as well, how family situations can get so bad that we see murders and cover-ups and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's true.
You're far more likely to be murdered by someone you know than by a Gacy or a Dahmer or a Bundy.
I do. Julian brings it up, and I don't want to segue into leaning towards ending the show. I know we're till 10, but I might have to get off a little bit earlier because of I have psychology schoolwork to do and a project to get done by tomorrow. 2 of them actually. But so Eric Julian says H.H. Holmes also started naming people that he said killed that he killed that were actually still alive at the time. And talking about that, we've talked about Jeff Mudgett, we've talked about H.H. Holmes, the Murder Castle. We want to announce for our next show, we will have Jeff Mudgett on the show. And he is the great grandson of H.H. Holmes himself, or Hubert Mudgett. Is that his name? Right? His real name? What's his actual? I know his last name is Mudgett, but what was his real name? I forget off the top of my head.
You asking me? I'm the worst with pronouncing words.
Yeah, because everybody he goes by H.H. Holmes, but his last name was Mudgett.
It was, yeah.
It was Hebert. Was it his real first name, or?
I'd have to recall. I have to look.
Yeah,
it up.
yeah. But we will have Jeff Mudgett on. Of course, he has this theory that, of course, Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes was the same person, as you alluded to, Richard. But he has been on TED Talks talking about this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he will be our next guest, giving his opinion of his great-great-grandfather. And I know Laura cannot wait for that show either, because she has her own suspicions and her own background and study between H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper. So I won't say they're going to come together in a negative way. But
it'll be an exploration for sure. Yeah,
it will definitely.
Thanks, Henry Mansfield Mudgett.
Henry Mansfield. I was way off, but I was close enough.
Sam got it.
It was Mudgett, yeah, definitely. And then,
do we have time to talk about Sam's question regarding female serial killers?
Of course, I was going to bring up Erin's child killers. What was her name? Mary Bell.
There are several actually, and I looked at a number of them for the second volume that were nurses and targeted children, especially. Especially a couple of them that were out of Texas.
Yeah,
there's an infamous one out of Massachusetts that we were just discussing. I think in the first show, James.
Yeah, I think we were. I forgot who it was off the top of my head. But of course, in your first book, you had the Moore murders. They just targeted children. They sexually assaulted them and they killed them.
Yeah, they did, and it was an interesting situation because Sam mentions Eileen Wuornos, of course. Myra Hindley, who was half of the Moore murders, has often said that she was completely under the thrall of Ian Brady, the more dominant partner. You do often see, don't you, Laura, when there are two killers working in tandem, it's rarely an equal partnership. One is more dominant, the other is more submissive. I also in the book talk about the Cromwell Street House of Horrors, Fred and Rosemary West. For the longest time, Fred West was believed to be the dominant driving force in that relationship. As time went on, it became clear that, in fact, Rosemary West was far worse, far more manipulative than her husband was.
It's interesting with a lot of, especially the female-male partnerships, of who's the more dominant one. And it's very interesting because in a lot of the cases, it comes to find out the females really, the driving force with the two sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and for people that were wondering, so if you're listening, Sam Bellatrix asked, I'm interested in female serial killers. Are the red flags different with women than men? I'm thinking specifically about Aileen Wuornos. And so for people that were wondering, that's why that was brought up. Then we have one more from Christopher before, Rich, we allow you to talk about anything you have coming out and what people can look forward to. And Christopher asked another question. There have been people like the Candyland murderers where there were more than one serial killer teaming up together. Is that a product of environment or two or three people with similar ideals? That kind of relates to that question we just talked about, but I think expands upon it.
Yeah, to me or to Laura?
Both of you, especially you, Rich, specifically first, because you guessed.
Okay. I mean, one pair that I looked at putting in the first book and didn't was Charles Ng and Leonard Lake, who had kind of been a partnership. So you do sometimes see these kind of unholy alliances. I do think, though, many serial killers themselves are kind of lone wolves. They are willing to manipulate a patsy or a weaker person into helping them out. We did see this with Dean Cole, as you mentioned earlier too. So some of them are very charismatic and can get what they want that way. Others will simply intimidate and threaten other parties to do what they want. But it's kind of rare that you see a genuine team up of serial killers, at least in my experience.
Laura?
No, it is. It's very rare. And this is coming from the toolbox killers expert. Funny enough, next week, the homicide conference I'm going to, it's hosted by Steve Daniels. Hey, Steve, if you're watching, he was actually one of the ones who was at in Leonard's cabin when they first found the cabin and they first started excavating it. He was actually there and one of the first responding officers. He only told me briefly about it, but I'm actually cannot wait to see him in person and dig into that again. But yeah, no, it's pretty a rare phenomenon for one person to have these kind of fantasies and these deviant urges, and then to meet another person who not only shares them but willing to actually commit these acts together. And with Bittaker and Norris, for anybody who knows the case, they met in prison. And they were sitting in prison, writing out their fantasies every day and talking about it, planning it, and it morphed into what it was. But yeah, it's pretty rare, but there are the cases, where we have, and then, above 2 or more is a pack, and that's even more rare. That's more than 3 people coming together to commit these acts.
One that did make it into the second volume, Bernardo and Homolka.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. The Canadian serial killers where, again, for the longest time, it was believed that Paul Bernardo, the male, was the driving force. And that was certainly the argument used by Carla Homolka's defense team. For those that don't know them, they raped and murdered Carla Homolka's own sister.
Yeah, it's a horrible case. Known as like the Barbie and Ken murders.
Yes, they are known as the Ken and Barbie murders. And Carla Homolka is now walking free in Canada, having literally gotten away with, although she served some time in jail. Many, if not the majority of people in Canada seem to feel that she should never have been released.
Yeah.
Wes Coleman, where are you at? Tackle it. But so we're at the show. Richard, do you have any projects, anything that you're going to, any books coming out that you would like to talk about? And where can people find you?
I always have something coming out. I'm always working on something. My latest book came out just this week, in fact, and it's you alluded to this earlier, James, the handy military question and answer book. It's essentially everything you could want to know about the U.S. military in like 400 pages. Beyond that, my next book is a paranormal book. It is called Blood, Death, and Fears. It is about the haunting of Old South Pittsburgh Hospital in Tennessee.
Yes, great place.
Oh, cool.
Chattanooga, Tennessee, of all places. I've been there. Great place twice. I love it. That's awesome. I look forward to that book. I had some crazy experiences there at Old South Pittsburgh Hospital before it was bought and renovated. So that's awesome. I look forward to that. And I know Rich, you served military, and of course, being an Army veteran myself, I look forward to picking that book up and reading it and seeing what you've had to say.
Thank you. And could we just thank everyone that tuned in tonight, especially the great comments in the chat. It's really been a good experience.
I was going to say that at the end, Richard. Come on. But yes, definitely, Rich. You bit the tongue right there. Thank you, Richard. You're an amazing author. You're an amazing paranormal investigator. You're an amazing friend of mine. And I really look forward to seeing you again. Laura, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we go?
Thank both of you for your service, and thank you guys for everybody who was commenting tonight. It was like lit up. It was question after question. So thank you guys for watching. I cannot wait for volume 2. I really hope you do cults. I'm hoping your publisher is listening. And if you guys want to see the book again, here it is. Check it out. But I can't wait. And if you need any research or anything, just hit me up, Richard.
Actually, stick around when we're done, because there is something I would love to pick your brain on.
Sure.
Of course. We'll stick around. So, Richard, please stay on. Everybody, thank you for coming on again tonight, watching. If you're going to be listening when this goes on to Spotify and all those other podcast platforms, please don't hesitate to reach out to Laura and I for maybe a guest that you'd like us to have on or a specific topic. And of course, when Richard has volume 2 come out, we'll probably have him back on again. When that comes out in January, correct?
Be out in January.
All right, perfect. So around January, we probably will have Richard back on. But everybody, and May. In May, we're going to have Jeff Mudgett on, so stay tuned for that announcement tomorrow. Probably I'll announce that date, and we'll be talking about H.H. Holmes. If you want to catch me anywhere, you can follow Duo Demonology, and I'm doing hell of a lot of events all the way till November and October. So catch me there, demonology.org, and soon we'll have trueevil.us, our website, which will finally come out. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us.
I'll say one last thing. I'll be in Milwaukee next weekend for anybody out that way, doing the Jeffrey Dahmer tour. Anybody's out in that area.
So Laura, Richard, thank you. Well, I'll talk to you guys when the show is over, off broadcast. All right, everybody, have a good night.
Happy Easter, guys.